We have to kick things off with some sad news. Butch Reed passed away on Friday at the age of 66 after suffering not one but two massive heart attacks in the last few weeks. WWE issued a statement on his passing, which I will read here. WWE is saddened to learn that Butch Reed passed away today at the age of 66. A native of Kansas City, Missouri, Reed embraced the sport of wrestling after a professional football career with ironically, the Kansas City Chiefs. Reed quickly proved himself to be a force in Mid-South wrestling in battles against legendary competitors such as Ric Flair, Hacksaw Jim Duggan, Jim Neidhart, and more. The Natural, Butch Reed, crashed onto the WWE scene with brash blonde hair in a statement win over Coco Beware at WrestleMania 3. Reed found himself at the crossroads of history, competing in the first ever Survivor Series and Royal Rumble in WWE history. After a match against Macho Man Randy Savage at WrestleMania 4, he departed WWE and would go on to partner with Ron Simmons in WCW as a tag team called Doom. Doom would defeat the Steiner brothers at Capital Combat to win the NWA tag team titles. And following a highly successful run in WCW as the tag team champions, Doom would eventually share the ring in a one-on-one steel cage match at Super Brawl 1. WWE extends its condolences to Reed's family and friends. I don't have a lot of memories of Butch Reed outside of WWE. I was aware of the Doom run, but I wasn't week to week watching WCW at that point. So outside of that WWE run in the late 80s, I've had to kind of educate myself in later years about his career. And, I would come across matches every now and then where he was in it. I know he had some classic bouts with Ric Flair in the early 80s and the mid 80s as a babyface. He worked both heel and babyface, but he was a huge babyface in some territories. Obviously, if you read up on him, the greatest success that he had was in Mid-South Wrestling, probably, as Hacksaw Butch Reed came to WWE. They called him the Natural. He was a heel his entire run there, which wasn't very long. I would say he was in the company for, if he made his big, I don't know that it was his debut, but his first big match was probably WrestleMania 3, and it was shortly after WrestleMania 4 that he left. So he wasn't there much longer than a year. And there is the long-held story, because you might hear about this as well. And I've talked about this on the podcast. I think I answered a mailbag question about this years ago. The long-held story that he was under consideration for a run with the Intercontinental title in 1987, the same year he debuted, after Ricky Steamboat committed the cardinal sin of requesting time off to be present for the birth of his son. I guess that didn't make him a team player. WWE didn't like that. Kind of reminds me of Vince Russo's story about the Vince McMahon comment that convinced him to leave the company. He said he was feeling burned out with the addition of SmackDown, because they sort of just threw SmackDown on he and Ed Ferrara, who were doing Raw and pretty much everything else every single week. When SmackDown became a weekly series in '99, it just sort of got dumped on them. I'm not even sure he got a bump in pay. I think it was just like, hey, we have this extra show now, and you guys are gonna have to write more TV, 2 more hours now each week of TV, and it was a lot. It was a huge workload, and he was feeling burned out. Wanted to be able to see his kids more. He said his wife was basically raising his kids for him, and he was barely being able to see them. And he has a conversation about this. He brings this up to Vince McMahon, and Vince McMahon just says to him, Vince, I don't understand the problem. Just hire a nanny to watch your kids. You make enough money. So Vince felt he had to get the belt off Steamboat, and as the story goes, Butch Reed was a no-show on the night that he was supposed to win the Intercontinental title from Ricky Steamboat. The urban legend, the story goes that Butch Reed was a no-show. And I guess there were times where he would either show up late or he would no-show certain events. It wasn't like a first-time occurrence. And the Honky Tonk Man, who up to that point, in the weeks and even a few months leading up to this night, had been doing mostly jobs at a lot of the live events, and jobs for guys who weren't even big stars. I mean, he was doing jobs for Ken. At that point, Ken Patera wasn't as big of a star as he used to be. And S.D. Jones and just people like that. So he was there that night, and he had just wrapped up he was shooting some promos. Now, this is according to the Honky Tonk Man. Finished shooting these promos, he's standing in the hallway, and Vince McMahon and Hulk Hogan are talking, and they walk right by him. And as they walk by him, Honky says he could hear Hogan saying to Vince, "How about that guy?" And Vince says, "Yeah, that might work." And so Vince McMahon pulls Honky Tonk Man aside, or he pulls him into his office, whatever. And he explains what they want to do, and he asks him, "Are you ready? Are you ready? If we give you the ball here, are you ready to take that ball and run?" And Honky said, "Absolutely." Now, there are conflicting accounts of whether or not Butch Reed actually did no-show that night. Reed himself says that he did. And if you watch the post-match celebration, because Honky Tonk Man said the same thing. He goes, "Yep, Butch Reed wasn't there," because Butch Reed no-showed that night. There was a post-match celebration that they aired on TV where Honky Tonk Man went into the locker room and he was showered in praise from all of the heels. Macho Man came up to him to hug him and congratulate him, and it was just the heel locker room celebrating with this guy who just won the Intercontinental title. In the background, standing there, celebrating, you can see Butch Reed. And Butch Reed is standing right there. Honky Tonk Man says that was not taped that night. Because you would say, if Butch Reed no-showed, how was he backstage for this celebration? And Honky Tonk Man says that's because that celebration wasn't taped until the next day. And then they shot that, and then they aired it, I guess, that week. Or actually, it didn't even air for a few weeks. When it aired on TV, you would think it was all shot in the same night. So I know there have been some questions from people over the years about that. How is it possible he no-showed if he was right there in the background because it wasn't shot on the same night? He never did win the Intercontinental title. He never won any titles in WWE. Now, he may have been under consideration. I think Bruce Pritchard has said that. Either that he was or he can believe that he was. So yeah, they may have had a whole list of people. It's like when Bret Hart won the WWF title for the first time. Supposedly there was a list of 5 names on that list of who they could put the belt on when they took it off Flair. Bret was one of the names. Tito Santana was rumored to be another name on the list. I don't know who the other names were. So it's possible they had in their mind a list of names, and Butch Reed was maybe briefly considered. But did he actually no-show, and that's what cost him the title? Who knows? For sure, who knows? We may never know the true answer. But they went with Honky Tonk Man. That was due to the push from Hogan, and that led to Honky getting the biggest push of his career, and Reed never went anywhere except out the door the following year. Now later on, he did end up tagging with Ron Simmons as Doom in WCW, managed by Teddy Long, and then he feuded with Simmons. And that was it for Butch Reed with a major promotion. He was still wrestling on independent shows and small shows for years. I think his last match was in 2013. He did a tag match at an independent event. But his last appearance on WWE television was back in 2007. The Teddy Long wedding to Crystal Marshall. Butch Reed was there. He was part of the wedding party. He made an appearance briefly on the show. Reed was apparently a huge fan of Will Hobbs in AEW and the potential that he thought Will Hobbs had to be a big star. He even commented on some of Hobbs's pictures on Instagram. You can see comments under a couple of different photos that Hobbs put up from his official Instagram account, sort of endorsing him and praising him. So clearly he was a fan of the guy. According to Dave Meltzer, Reed told his family, that's the new Hacksaw. The first time he saw him on TV, he said, that's the new Hacksaw, because he used to be Hacksaw Butch Reed. Hacksaw Hobbs, that's got a nice ring to it, I gotta say. That's even better than Powerhouse Hobbs. Hacksaw Hobbs. Hacksaw Will Hobbs, I would like to see that be his new name. One other health note, Devon Dudley, who has been working for a while now behind the scenes as a producer for WWE, revealed this week on his Table Talk podcast that he suffered a stroke but he is doing much better. He is back to his normal self, which is great to hear. He didn't say when he suffered the stroke, but he did miss several weeks of his show in November and said that at the time, he said he was dealing with some health issues. He was being very coy, didn't want to reveal what they were. So it had to be sometime maybe shortly before that. But I watched, part of his latest podcast. It's him and a couple of other people who are hosting. It looks like a Zoom call, and he looked good. He looked normal and sounded good, and so I'm very happy to hear that he has recovered, seemingly 100% fully recovered.